Welcome to Bitcoin Escape Plan. This is not financial advice. My name is Jacob. Let's look at the charts. So the topic of today's video is Bitcoin dominance, dead or alive. And basically, we're just going to take a look at the recent highs and lows of Bitcoin on the higher time frames and correlate that to Bitcoin dominance. But this worked really well in the last video, so I'm going to do it again. I'm going to give you some actionable advice that you can use on the 4-hour chart. This is for any of you dirty traders out there. And for anyone who is here for the first couple hours of the video, thank you so much. Like and subscribe, and let's get into it. So the 4-hour chart, this was Saturday. We bottomed down to this 83.6K pivot. We're pretty clear that at the moment, this is the low, is over here. This was on Friday. We got back above the 4-hour SMA, and as you can see, it's starting to slope upwards like a happy face, which is a good sign. We tapped it a little bit on Monday, which is fine, nothing wrong with that at all, and showed strength afterwards, went right back to that 87.7K fib pivot that I did talk about in yesterday's video, and I have mentioned on Threads, so if you're not following me on Threads, you're missing out. But essentially what we have now is we've broken a bit above that. We did go to 89.2K, which I've also talked about a million times. We haven't been able to hold it at the moment. So what I think is going to happen in the next 4 to 16 hours is we're probably going to make one more attempt down here. This is going to continue curving up. It's likely going to curve up to here, I would imagine. What is that? 87 on the nose. That's probably where I think price is going to get to before it's going to want to come back to 87.7. And then we can see if we have enough momentum to go higher or not. And I will get into higher time frame context at another time. All right, so let's dive into Bitcoin dominance first. I'll kind of get the idea laid out of what it is that we want to be paying attention to on this chart, and then I can bounce back and forth from Bitcoin so you can actually see, what do these dates correlate to? Like when something is happening on Bitcoin dominance, what is going on for Bitcoin? So as you can see, and just as a brief overview from anyone who's not familiar with this chart, I talk about it in my book, but essentially this is the Big Bang. This is the start of the Big Bang. There was nothing else in the world but Bitcoin and like one or two other coins at this time. So Bitcoin dominance is high. It's at like 98, 99%. When we get to over here, now Ethereum exists. Now some of the other altcoins are starting to have some more money in. And then really once ERC20 tokens come into the 2017 cycle and it's easier to make altcoins and stablecoins and all of that, that is really the first time where we start to see Bitcoin dominance bleed and money starts moving outside of Bitcoin into the other altcoins. So very important trend. This is the only time it's ever going to look like that on the chart because it was the first time. This is all of the planets are going out and the stars are being formed and everything is starting to cool down here. And we're starting to understand what the universe looks like if we want to use the analogy that I used from the book. So every time that we've seen a cycle now, it's what I refer to as a choose your own adventure story. Nothing looks the same. Obviously, it's never going to look like this again. It's never going to look like that. It's not quite the same here. As you can see, it's been much more of like a stair-stepping pattern, very similar to the price of Bitcoin last couple of years. This is, I would actually say, the healthiest that I've seen this chart look. This is harder to predict. There's a lot of chop here, Still pretty easy, same as anything else when you're looking at, I use the 20-week Bollinger Bands. So anytime you have an interaction with the bottom or the top band, that's either going to correlate to a move higher or a move lower. Same thing with the 20-week SMA. Very important to pay attention to what does the price do here. As you can see, it broke above it and then it needed to chop. It stayed above it, but it kept touching it, and then it touched it one more time. And then I was like, nope, I'm done. I touched the stove enough times and I'm going to run. For context, this is around the bottom in 2019, I believe. Actually, I think it was early 2019, and then money started flowing back into Bitcoin. We'll take a look at that after. I'm really more concerned about the more recent peaks. than I am about the older ones, but this is just a brief historical outlook on it. So if you remember 2021, obviously, big run for Bitcoin. So this is the April peak. What's Bitcoin dominance doing? Money is flowing out of Bitcoin at that first, whatever that was, 64K, 63K peak. And then if you look at December, which again is the final peak there, whereas Bitcoin dominance is at the low for that point, or the equivalent low. There's actually 2 times where it goes lower, but that's fine. And then we're into Celsius and all that is exploding. BlockFi, all that is exploding. What's Bitcoin dominance doing? Bitcoin dominance is rising, but it falls one more time into the FTX collapse, and then it has been consistently growing ever since. And this is actually the first time since early 2023 that we have touched this monthly SMA again, which is very important. It is indicative that we are about to see a flip in the cycle. So like, as you can see here, this was in the bear market. So this is the end of the bull market. It's right here. So what's happening? Bitcoin price is peaking and money is dropping out of Bitcoin. Ethereum price is peaking. And that's where a lot of the money probably is from Bitcoin, is over there and the other alts. And then it starts in the opposite direction. And then same thing for into the halving year. We have a big spike for Bitcoin dominance towards the end of the year. That's right around when Bitcoin reclaimed 10K and was on its way back to 20K for the first time, and then drops off a cliff as money starts flowing into the altcoins and everything else. But we haven't really seen that this cycle. So that's really what I want to take a look at now, is more the last couple years and see how that correlates to Bitcoin. So let's see if anything jumps out to us at the moment. So this would have been October, November of last year, would have been the first time that Bitcoin started to move again. It had already broken. So over here, this is the halving year. This is where we hit 73 for the first time. So you can see a little bit of sparks of life. So it hits 73 for the first time in the halving year. Bitcoin dominance peaks after that, but then has to come down. So it seems like the price does precede the movement ever so slightly before we see a movement with dominance. That being, the price of Bitcoin precedes the price of the dominance, or rather whatever the percentage of dominance, not the price. And then November, this guy over here, October, November is where we do see that big presidential pump where we go from, under 70K to over 100K in that one candle. And what that tells us is that a lot of money was flowing into Bitcoin at that time. And then as soon as it hit 100, it started to flow elsewhere. And this was, if you were in meme coins at the time, this was the time to be in meme coins. It was right around here. And then they started dropping off a cliff just as money started to flow back into Bitcoin. And money flowed into Bitcoin until about July. And if we all remember, where was the bottom this year? The bottom was here, March and April. So this is when we went back to 78K for Bitcoin. So even though price was dropping for Bitcoin, dominance was rising. And then as far as we understand, at the moment, this is the peak for dominance, is in July. What was the price doing in July? The price was hitting a new all-time high. That's when it hit 123. That was the first time it hit 123. Super relevant, very important. As far as we've seen, that is the peak for Bitcoin dominance this time around. What does that correlate to? Actually, let's draw a new line over here, because that is an important level. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. That should be a horizontal line. I don't know what the hell that is. Oh no, someone else is going to make fun of me for not using my hotkeys. Whatever, don't care. I'm going to use, that's fine. I'll leave it red. So at the moment, that is the highest that Bitcoin dominance is going to go, because any other time that we have hit this, so we did, again, this is the halving year, so not quite the same as Bitcoin itself. And then we start dropping, still in the halving year. and then we peak right before. So during the last cycle, when Bitcoin price is going up, Bitcoin dominance is going down, as opposed to this one, where Bitcoin dominance has been steadily rising the whole time the price has been going down. So where was price? Right here. Price is at 15,500 right here. And it's been consistently going up ever since. What does that tell us? That tells us that money has not been flowing to the altcoins. It tells us it has been exclusively flowing to Bitcoin. And even now, over here, you see when we touch the SMA, or this one as well, we're kind of far from it. We stay kind of far from it. Like there's a decent amount of distance between the SMA and where the candles are actually wicking to. Whereas here, we're pretty close. We really haven't gone that far away from the SMA. And it seems like that's going to remain the case, is that we don't really want to leave it. We want to stay kind of close to it because it's not sure if we are done or not yet. I think it's likely it's going to start to flatten out at some point if we are ever going to get any type of alt season next year, which I'm not entirely convinced that we do. There's a very good chance, in my opinion, that most of the money that would have flown in the past into altcoins is now flowing into Polymarket, so people can just bet directly on what they think is going to happen in the market pretty easily. Like me personally, I would much rather bet on what I think the price is going to do for Bitcoin than I would, 135 on CoinMarketCap. Like I don't know anything about that compared to knowing about the price of Bitcoin. So I think for a lot of people, they're just going to see that as more convenient for them. So that's something that I would be looking at, is how does the price continue, or rather percentage of Bitcoin dominance, continue to interact now that we have touched the SMA, which happened back in August. And what happened with the price in August? That was when we dropped down after that first peak. But we set a new all-time high at that time, 124.5K. So that was the first indication that money was starting to flow out. So we had what some people are going to consider to be the early top. I think the 126 top is like kind of a fluke, is more just like people not wanting to give up on Bitcoin, which I believe that's this guy here. We'll jump down to the lower time frames and we'll start looking at actual specific dates. Leave a like and a comment so that I know that you're enjoying the video. Thank you so much for everyone who is still here at whatever point. I am not even looking at the clock. So this guy here, Friday the 10th. So the crash that happened is on the 17th. So 17th is over here. That's when we dropped to 106 after 126. And then over here, we keep chopping. We go up. This is when we failed. So anyone who's on Threads will know this. I talked about this a million times. This is when we were on our way back to 117.6 after we had fallen down to 106 right over here-ish, I believe. Or no, what was that? The 17th? The 17th. That's when we fell to 106 on the price. And then on the failure of 117.6, that's when we touch the SMA again, and then money starts flowing back into Bitcoin. And what is this peak right here? That was the first time that we dropped back below 100K. Was that guy right here. So super important. You can also see it a little bit more clearly on the monthly chart, but I wanted to show you on the daily because you can actually see to the day that on the day when there was peak fear for Bitcoin initially, we still saw money flowing disproportionately to Bitcoin compared to everywhere else at that point, to a relative high. Like one of the things that we can see from the trend with Bitcoin dominance is that over time, it's becoming, less and less like percentage that's staying in Bitcoin. Like I have this marked off as the highest that I could believe that would go, but realistically here would have been just as believable, 63. Or, any one of these would have been fine too. But I don't think it's unreasonable that it's already done, So as we saw over here, there's a good chance it might spike up one more time. If people really want to put a ton of money into Bitcoin, we do have to consider as well just the oh god, that's the dog. So we do have to consider as well the factor that when the stablecoins are passed, that when the stablecoin acts are passed next year, which I'll get into this more in another video, but just to touch on it briefly, what's going to happen is currently the US is reducing its foreign demand on dollars. That's part of the tariffs. That's what they're doing, is they're trying to get US dollars back in the US instead of relying on foreign borrowers holding treasuries and holding large reserves of cash. Why they're doing that is so that they will have more treasuries available for JP Morgan Chase and Citibank, that when they start producing their stable coins, they have to be backed one-to-one with the US dollar. What does that mean? If I'm JP Morgan Chase and I am custodying $4 trillion for my customers, and I tell them, hey, $1 trillion of these dollars is in cash right now, and you got to pay wire transfer fees on it anytime you want to move it. But if you put it in JP Morgan Chase coin instead, I won't charge you any fees for those wire transfers. It'll be at the speed of Bitcoin or the speed of stable coins, and that's going to cause them to have a tremendous amount of demand. Upwards of a couple $1 trillion worth of demand for those stable coins, which means they have to buy the equivalent amount of US treasuries in order to back those stable coins. That is a big part of the treasuries and all that. That's what's happening when they're doing that. So what do I think is going to happen in that circumstance? Well, theoretically, we're still going to have Bitcoin live somewhere between here and here. So even if it is, we start to see money flow into the altcoins or whatever now, which is very possible that's what we start to see once Bitcoin has its proper top, which I already talked about that in the other videos. Go listen to the other videos and the videos that I'll talk about in the future on what I actually think the realistic price predictions are. I'll probably make a price prediction one soon, as most of that I've done on Threads. I haven't really done on here as much. So again, anyone who's not following me on Threads, I don't really use Twitter. I'll start using Twitter more once I can get like 100 people to follow me on there. I currently have one follower on there, and it's me. It's literally me. So it doesn't count. So everything that I post that's, quick analysis on a daily basis is on Threads. So what do I think is going to happen when those stablecoins go live? Well, a good chunk of that money is going to flow into Bitcoin initially, which might be the last little Pico top up into this range, and then it is going to flow elsewhere. People are going to want some of their chicken tendies. They're going to want something, Ethereum, XRP. They're going to want something to have legs, and they'll get a little bit of a taste of it before it drops off a cliff. But realistically, what that means is, if I'm JP Morgan Chase and I just printed $1 trillion worth of stablecoins, now this is the other important factor. We have currently lived in a paradigm where all of the money exists within crypto. If I'm JP Morgan Chase and now I can offer JP Morgan Chase coin to my customers in exchange for them not having to use wire transfers anymore, they're not going to buy just fucking Bitcoin and Ethereum with it. They're going to buy real estate. They're going to buy gold. They're going to buy houses. They're going to buy businesses. A lot of the money that would traditionally stay in Bitcoin in the event that, say, Tether printed $1 trillion, 40% of that money on a minimum is going to go into Bitcoin. And that's part of what continues to pump the price of Bitcoin. Now, we're going to decouple that a bit with JP Morgan Chase coin, and Citibank and these other banks are now offering that essentially in a traditional sense, where some of that money is going to move elsewhere. It's not all going to stay in Bitcoin. So we're going to have to pay attention to what does that mean for the chart. This chart is correlated to Bitcoin relative to the rest of the crypto market cap. So we won't necessarily see it like plummet off a cliff, but it won't directly affect the price the same way that it has in the past. And I think it's realistic that we might just kind of see this get thinner and thinner. My base case is essentially that we'll peak out somewhere over here if we get another peak. If we're not done already, we very well may be done. That's the topic of this video, Bitcoin dominance, dead or alive. It may be dead. It may be dead already because we've touched the SMA. Typically when things touch the SMA, what happens? They start to fail, or they're breaking to the upside, which is not what's happening in this case. This is a break to the upside. That's not what's happening. This is a break to the downside. What do we get? We got one more peak, and then we had a massive drop off. So that would be my base case scenario now. I've been rambling for way too long. But essentially, this guy over here, that was when Bitcoin was at peak fear and money still flowed to Bitcoin, and even now when Bitcoin is at the lowest it's been on the fear and greed index, we're back below the SMA, but we're not down here, like it's not like money is flowing out of Bitcoin and into other projects in droves. For the most part, it's staying where it has been since last year, staying in the same region pretty much that it has been for more than a year now. So it looks pretty strong. That would be my base case, though, is that we have a potential for one more big pump into Bitcoin. There's a number of factors that could cause that. Them allowing people to pay their taxes with it, which I still think is really fucking stupid. Do not pay your taxes with Bitcoin. Don't know why you would do that. Unless you're just holding like an insane amount of it. I'm going to talk about, so you guys voted on Threads for tomorrow's video to be me talking my opinion about MicroStrategy. So that's what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'll talk a little bit about just kind of what that means for that chart. My opinion, I told people to get out of it last year. And I would seem to be correct about that. It's been mostly flat or down for all of the year. So we'll see how that goes moving forward. But that is going to affect the amount of money that is flowing into Bitcoin instead of other projects. So to summarize, so I know I mostly just rambled another history lesson instead of actually saying what I think is going to happen. This is what I think is going to happen. Is we're going to chop with the SMA for a little bit. We're going to get one more attempt to the upside, which that's what this guy was. That's when we were panicking for Bitcoin, that first drop. I would imagine the same thing is going to happen. If we have a relief rally now and we do see price return to 120 or 130, I think initially we're going to get a spike for Bitcoin dominance that is then going to be followed by the actual drop off. And that's when the real drop off will follow, which will probably also correspond to the SMA starting to curve downward like it did here. So that is what I would be taking a look at for Bitcoin dominance, a very important chart just for you to understand roughly, where is the money in the crypto market. In a future video, I will go over total 2, which is all of the money in the altcoin market. It does not look very pretty right now. It does not look good. Subscribe, leave me some comments. Let me know what is working well in these videos, what you would like me to answer questions for. I really appreciate all of the early support. You guys have been great, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow's video. Thank you so much. See you later.